Hey guys, tonight we set sail on a very slow-moving, oddly specific journey, the life of Zheng He, the legendary admiral who commanded ships so large. Some modern engineers still squint at the blueprints and shrug.
You're going to float alongside palaces made of teak, hauling tribute across waters darker than sleep, while sipping spiced tea and occasionally trying to bribe a sultan with porcelain.
There will be maps that lie, cargo holds that creak, and a rhinoceros who very much does not enjoy sea travel.
And yes, you probably wouldn't survive even 10 minutes of this voyage seasickness. Eunuch politics, imperial edicts, and mosquitoes the size of chopsticks, but luckily, you don't have to .so before you get comfortable. Take a moment to
like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here.
And tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing those sleepy check-ins from all over the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not Zheng He yet.
In fact, you are still called Ma He, and you live in the winding, earthy hills of Yunnan, far from the polished tiles of Beijing.
The year is somewhere around 1371. Though honestly, no one is recording your birth with any fanfare.
You're born into a devout Muslim family descended, legend says, from an Arab general who came to China centuries earlier. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's the kind of thing families say when trying to hold on to their dignity in tough times.
Either way, your father is a soldier under the waning Yuan dynasty, which means you are born into collapse. The Yuan Empire, the Mongol-ruled regime that had once held all of China in its steely grip, is losing power like a leaky rice sack. Peasant uprisings boil over, provinces rebel, and famine stalks the land.
Meanwhile, a new force rises from the muddy banks of the Yangtze, Xu Yuanzhang, a monk-turned warlord with very strong opinions on dynasties.
He builds his own, calls it the Ming, and very soon, it's wiping the Yuan off the map like stray tea stains. Yunnan, your homeland, is one of the last Yuan strongholds.
And this is where your childhood goes sideways. Ming armies eventually march,
Led by General Fu Yud, a man who thinks mercy is inefficient. During the takeover, your father is killed, and you around age 10 are captured along with countless other boys. And here's where things get a bit
permanent. Yeah.
Taken to Nanjing and forcibly made a eunuch.
Yep. Not exactly a soft entry into civil service. Historians still argue whether this was standard practice for captives or something more targeted, but the end result is the same. You've now joined the vast, candlelit, whisper-heavy ranks of the imperial eunuchs, and though it's a brutal,
irreversible transition, being a eunuch in the Ming court isn't necessarily a dead end. Oddly enough, it might be your golden ticket. Unlike Confucian scholars, those robe-wearing bureaucrats who sniff at ambition, eunuchs can rise through loyalty, cunning, and knowing the right person to flatter.
And you're about to meet someone very important. As a young palace servant, you're assigned to the household of Prince Yudi, the fourth son of the newly enthroned Hongwu Emperor.
Yudi is clever, driven, and just unpredictable enough to enjoy your company.
Maybe it's your wit, maybe it's your fierce intelligence.
Or maybe he just thinks your stride is funny.
Either way, a bond begins to form between the prince and the former boy from Yunnan.
You become his close companion, perhaps even his confidant. Yudi is stationed in Beijing, tasked with defending China's northern frontier from Mongol incursions.
It's a cold, dusty life of strategy and watchfulness.
You shadow him, learning about military command, administration, and court politics from someone who plays the long game. You study maps, not because someone tells you to, but because they're beautiful, curled and worn, and full of mysterious coastlines with dragons drawn in the margins.
You start asking questions. Where do these ships go? What's across that water? Why does no one draw the southern oceans properly? These are not typical thoughts for a eunuch.
But you're not typical. Historians still debate just how close your relationship with Yudi was. Some say you were just a trusted attendant. Others hint at a deeper friendship, maybe even something bordering on mentorship. But what's certain is this. When Yudi eventually declares himself emperor in a rather dramatic palace coup, he brings you with him and gives you a new name. Zheng He. The name is powerful.
Zheng refers to conquest, harmony, and expansion. He keeps your Muslim identity intact.
It's a name built for ocean spree and foreign ports. It's a name that sounds good shouted across a windy deck. So here you are, no longer Ma He, no longer a child of chaos and rebellion.
Yeah, Zheng He now,
trusted by the emperor,
rising fast in court.
and soon you'll be asked to lead something so massive it makes every other voyage look like a canoe rental at the lake. But before you set sail, there's teak to cut, masts to measure, and rudders the size of whale spines to carve.
Your greatest journey hasn't started, but it's about to. And let's just say, it will involve more elephants than you were expecting. Your name is Zheng He now, and you wake up each morning to the clatter of scrolls, the shuffle of embroidered boots, and the muffled arguments of eunuchs outside the imperial archives. Your robes are rich, your tasks complicated, and yet your
Position is still a delicate balance, half administrator, half shadow. You move through the palace with purpose, because in a world where you have no heirs and no official lineage, your legacy will be carved in action. Not blood, it's the early 1400s, and Emperor Yongle, your old companion, Zhu Di, has settled
into his throne after staging a civil war that was, frankly, not as relaxing as he'd hoped.
His rule is ambitious,
He wants legitimacy.
and he wants the world to know that China is not only stable but splendid, powerful, and deeply uninterested in being underestimated. And that's where you come in. The emperor approaches you with a
Proposal so vast it feels like a joke. Take to the seas with a fleet of unprecedented scale. Visit foreign kingdoms. Display the magnificence of the Ming. And bring back tribute and, if necessary, a little humility from less cooperative rulers.
Oh, and do it diplomatically.
Mostly, you nod, suppressing the urge to ask how many boats we are talking. The answer is a lot. So begins your new role, Grand Director of the Treasure Fleet, a title so majestic it practically jingles. And let's talk about those ships for a second, because if you imagine a couple of creaky triremes and some patched up
Fishing vessels, you're off by a nautical mile.
These are treasure ships, massive wooden vessels, some reaching 400 feet in length, with 9 masts, watertight compartments, and ornate dragons carved into the prows. They are floating fortresses, complete with balconies, storerooms, and even gardens on deck to keep the cabbages fresh. Historians still argue whether these ships were actually that big. Some say the numbers were exaggerated by later chroniclers,
or mistranslated over time. Others believe the Ming had the resources and craftsmanship to pull it off.
Either way, what's certain is that the fleet dwarfed anything Europe would build for centuries.
Columbus's Santa Maria could fit inside one of your anchor chains, and it wasn't just treasure ships.
You oversaw a floating armada of over
300 vessels, supply ships, troop transports, water tankers, patrol boats, and even floating stables for the horses you brought as diplomatic gifts.
In total, nearly 30,000 men.
It's less of a voyage and more of a maritime city that moves with the tides. You coordinate with shipbuilders in the port of Longjiang, a hive of sawdust, hammers, and shouted measurements.
Everything smells like wet cedar and ambition. You inspect iron anchors the size of dinner tables.
You review silk banners stitched with poems and blessings. You order crates of porcelain, bronze mirrors, jade ornaments, and other glorious gifts for foreign rulers, though
the message is clear. These are not bribes.
They are reminders of Ming magnificence. Subtle flexes, if you will. But of course, not everyone is thrilled. Confucian scholars at court mutter about waste and pride.
Why spend millions of taels on expeditions when the Great War needs mending?
And the North bristles with Mongol raids.
Let the barbarians come to us, they argue. Why chase approval across oceans? You smile politely and ignore them, because the emperor backs you, and you believe in this mission not just as diplomacy, but as a legacy. You understand that the world is bigger than most imagine,
that beyond the horizon are stories, trade routes, and people who will speak your name if you give them a reason to remember it. Still, organizing the voyage is like herding turtles uphill. There are logistics to wrangle, water for thousands, food storage that won't rot, interpreters who speak Tamil, Arabic, and a bit of surprise Malay. You hire star readers,
wind readers, and a man who insists he can predict storms based on how his knees feel.
You let him come.
Why not?
The final fleet, when it launches, is a sight to behold.
You stand on the lead sheep's deck, watching the sails rise like silk mountains, every mast bristling with red flags. Drums pound, gongs echo,
Dorquicus cheer. A few officials sigh in bureaucratic dismay. And as the hull cuts into the river, the very first voyage of the treasure fleet begins. You're heading to Southeast Asia, India, and beyond.
And though the plan is to return in a couple of years, you secretly suspect this is just the beginning.
You don't know yet that this is the first of 7 monumental journeys, or that you'll travel over 30,000 miles, or that some of your gifts will become museum pieces, and others will simply confuse palace beds. But for now, you inhale the salt air and look forward.
Behind you is the Forbidden City.
Ahead, unknown ports, unfamiliar languages, and the wide,
rolling ocean that, for most of your peers, might as well be the edge of the map. You don't flinch.
You just adjust your silk robe and wonder whether the giraffes will behave. So here you are, Zheng He, admiral of the most extravagant naval expedition the world has ever seen, gliding down the coast of China, heading south toward kingdoms that flicker on your maps like candlelight.
And just a few weeks in, you've
already learned a few valuable lessons. 1. No matter how impressive your fleet is, tropical humidity always wins. 2. Monkeys are terrible shipmates. And 3. Diplomacy is mostly snacks and long silences. Your first major stop is Champa, in what is now central Vietnam.
The harbor welcomes your ships with curious stares and a touch of anxiety. After all, it's not every day a city looks out and sees floating castles anchored offshore, each one bristling with flags, sailors, and the occasional very seasick cow. The rulers of Champa, sensing the size of the treasure fleet and reading between the silk-draped lines, graciously accept your gifts and agree to pay tribute to the Ming Emperor. You nod, smile, and pass around porcelain bowls.
Everyone pretends this isn't a very polite power play. You take notes on the local spices, negotiate trade, and then sail onward like nothing happened. Next stop, Java.
Here, things get complicated. Java is beautiful, hot, and full of political intrigue. There are rival kings, mercenary factions, and markets selling everything from nutmeg to elephant harnesses. You try to stay out of local disputes, but one Javanese prince gets particularly bold, maybe emboldened by local politics, or maybe
just annoyed at all your drums.
Either way, he kidnaps some members of your crew. Big mistake. You respond not with open war, but with a measured show of force, which is a polite way of saying you fire some cannons and rescue your men while leaving just enough of the harbor intact to keep trade relations technically alive.
The prince reconsiders his diplomatic position.
You sail away with your fleet intact and your patience thinner than before. The further you go, the stranger the sights become. By the time you reach Calicut, on the southwestern coast of India, your sailors are sweaty, superstitious, and convinced that the parrots here understand Mandarin. They do not, but it doesn't stop the crew from trying. Calicut is a hub rich, bustling, and full of seasoned traders who've seen a dozen empires rise and fall. Still, your fleet turns heads. The sheer size of your ships astonishes the locals. Your translators are kept busy explaining your mission, your origins, and why exactly you brought so many tribute animals. Speaking of animals, this is where you acquire one of your more exotic companions, a giraffe. Technically, it's a gift from the ruler of Bengal, who had acquired it from traders farther west, likely in East Africa.
The giraffe arrives in a state of confusion and mild seasickness, but otherwise in good health.
Your crew is baffled. One
sailor thinks it's a mythical chielin, a creature that signifies peace and prosperity.
Another just wants to know how many buckets of leaves it eats per day. You begin to realize something. Diplomacy isn't just about who bows first.
It's also about who can create the most lasting memory, and nothing sticks in a foreign court mind quite like a gently blinking giraffe stepping off a boat the size of a temple. The voyages continue.
Your fleet sails westward through the Arabian Sea, exploring the ports of Hormuz and Aden, and eventually nudging along the east coast of Africa, places like Mogadishu and Mombasa. Here, the architecture is coral stone, the music is stringed and sweet, and the spices seem to stick in your robes for weeks. You meet local rulers with braided beards and elaborately carved thrones.
Some offer tribute with eager smiles.
Others hesitate until you mention the phrase imperial blessing.
That usually does the trick, and through all this, you maintain an exhausting schedule of ceremonies, banquets, exchange of gifts, and the occasional stern reminder that this voyage is not simply a pleasure cruise.
The Ming Emperor expects tribute,
recognition, and a nod to the idea that the Middle Kingdom sits at the center of civilization, even if it has to cross 2 oceans to collect the nod. Historians still debate just how much power you wield in these exchanges. Were you a diplomat with a sword or a soldier with a silk scarf? Some argue you were essentially a peaceful envoy. Others point out that your ships carried more than 2,000 armed troops and had cannons that could flatten a rebel harbor before breakfast.
The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in between. What is clear is that your reputation begins to spread. Word of your fleet moves faster than the wind. You are no longer just Zheng He, the eunuch admiral. You are Zheng He, the sea emperor, the dragon flag commander, the man whose ships blot out the sun and whose giraffes eat all the palace figs. Your crew, meanwhile, adapts.
They learn local phrases.
They develop rituals like rubbing the base of the mast for good luck before landfall, or always letting the youngest cabin boy throw the first coconut overboard during typhoon season.
One cook insists that a pinch of cardamom keeps rats out
of the rice bins.
You do not argue with results, and slowly, something changes in you. The ocean, once an obstacle, becomes a friend. You begin to feel its rhythms, anticipate its moods, respect its mood swings. You memorize stars not just for navigation, but because they make the loneliness less sharp. Each morning, you wake before sunrise, stand at the prow, and breathe in that thick, salted air.
Behind you, the deck creaks gently.
Above you, the sails
billow like the lungs of the world. And ahead, always ahead, is the next port, the next ruler, the next offering of tribute to ferry back to the emperor. You return to China not with mere stories, but with spectacle. Picture this. Your vast treasure fleet sliding into Nanjing's port like a mythical creature come home. The people lining the shores don't know where to look first, the towering masts or the zebra.
Or maybe the chattering crew unloading bolt after bolt of embroidered silk, rare spices in lacquered chests, coral beads, ostrich feathers, and yes,
the very confused giraffe wobbling down the gangplank. The emperor, seated in golden stillness, welcomes the display with the measured calm of a man who knows full well that his dynasty now appears invincible, thanks in part to you.
Tribute flows in, not just in goods but in acknowledgement.
Rulers from across the Indian Ocean basin have sent gifts, tokens, and official letters that say, politely but clearly, yes, we see you. Your reward isn't gold, though you could easily
fill your own palace with what you've brought back.
No, the emperor bestows on you something both symbolic and powerful. More ships, more funding, and even more autonomy.
He's already planning the next voyage before you've had a chance to change out of your sea-drenched robes. So you begin again. This time, the fleet is even more prepared.
You've learned from the first voyage, repaired the hulls, upgraded the water storage, and perhaps most crucially, expanded the collection of entertainers. Turns out, a good puppet show can ease diplomatic tension better than an extra crate
of jade, and you're not just sailing for show anymore.
Your presence in distant waters is now strategic.
Rumors swirl of pirates and rebels rising in the shadow of the Ming's growing influence.
You are tasked not only with diplomacy, but with reassurance. A subtle reminder that ignoring tribute obligations has consequences, and your ships carry both silk and steel. Take the kingdom of Sumatra, for instance. A local ruler named Sikandar
has gotten a bit too bold, refusing tribute, insulting emissaries, perhaps testing the reach of the Ming.
You arrive with your fleet, and within weeks, the situation is resolved. Let's just say, Sikandar is sent back to China for a long conversation with the emperor.
He is not heard from again. You don't relish this part. You are not a warmonger,
but you do understand balance. Sometimes one stern correction saves a dozen future wars. You make a point to be courteous but firm, and when your flag flies over foreign harbors, it speaks not just of diplomacy, but of a civilization deeply invested in being taken seriously. Meanwhile, your fleet continues to grow in legend. Sailors whisper stories in port markets. Children in Ceylon chant songs about the giant ships with painted eyes that blink during storms.
One local merchant swears your fleet sails with its own weather, that your ships bring rain to dry coastlines and calm to choppy harbors. You don't correct
them. In fact, part of you starts to enjoy the ambiguity. Are you merely a man with an excellent tailorship and a good memory for titles? Or are you a simple now part myth, part muscle, an ocean-born envoy who never seems to age and whose ships never seem to rot? Historians still argue over this period. Were these voyages merely ceremonial, puffed-up parades of national ego?
Or were they serious strategic maneuvers aimed at establishing a maritime sphere of influence centuries before such terms existed?
Most scholars agree on one thing, no other. Fleet came close to your scale for over 400 years.
And even fewer were led by someone who could quote Persian poetry, recite Confucian maxims, and order a formation of war junks to encircle a rebel fort before lunch. Back at sea, you continue your dance from port to port. Quilin, Hormuz, Aden,
Mogadishu, In each, you negotiate, observe, trade, and always take notes. Your personal journals, though likely lost to history, must have been filled with dazzling contrast. The spice sweet scent of Zanzibar's markets, the red dust of Somali roads, the rhythmic beat of coastal drums echoing across moonlit docks. Your crew, now seasoned, functions like clockwork. They know when to swap out moldy rice, how to handle a lion on deck, and which coastal winds spell trouble. Some even marry in foreign lands, temporarily or otherwise, blending cultures one bowl of stew at a time. And you, Zheng He, now likely in your 40s, carry the weight of both oceans and politics on your shoulders, not just as a mariner, but
as a symbol of what the Ming Dynasty aspires to be. Fast, harmonious, benevolent, and ever watchful, you walk the fine line between power and poetry. One night, anchored off the coast of Sri Lanka, you stand on the upper deck and listen to the
waves tapping the hull like slow applause. A junior officer sidles up, offering ginger tea, and nervously asks if you believe you will be remembered. You smile, sip, and say nothing. You already know. The real answer lies not in statues or steles, but in whether the winds carry your name
to the next port,
and whether it is greeted with fear, respect, or a quiet, reverent bow.
It's somewhere around 1413 now, and your ship's larger, faster, better supplied than ever, are once again cutting across waters that many mapmakers still consider full of sea monsters and unfinished lines.
You, Zheng He, have grown more than just a little seasoned at this point.
Your robes are heavier with medals, your beard slightly greyer at least in your mind, and your patience for disorganized port officials has diminished noticeably. You're heading to Calicut again, a place that's become familiar, almost cozy in its chaos.
But this voyage has a twist. Your orders include a bold extension of diplomacy, not just trade and tribute, but also religious and cultural respect. This time, your emperor has asked for an additional layer of outreach, and that's where your Muslim identity, never hidden, but rarely highlighted, becomes a tool of connection.
You request a detour to Mecca. The story, of course, is murky.
Historians still argue whether you truly made the Hajj or simply coordinated with envoys who did.
But among your crew and those who welcomed you in Arabia, the tale becomes legend.
Zheng He, the Chinese admiral, bowing toward the Kaaba, offering gifts at sacred sites, and forging ties between Ming China and the broader Islamic world.
It makes you more than just a military commander or a representative of imperial authority. It turns you into a bridge between worlds,
between religions,
between empires separated by sand and sea. You don't talk about it much.
Instead, you let the gesture speak.
Then it's onward through the Arabian Sea again, down past the Horn of Africa, until your fleet touches the Swahili coast.
This time, the local rulers greet you with musicians and dancers, bold fabrics, and long lists of trade requests.
They've heard of you now.
More than that, they've prepared for you. In Mogadishu, a sultan presents you with incense, ivory, and a leopard. The leopard, as you discover, has been semi-domesticated and responds to clapping. Your crew, thrilled and slightly terrified, named him Banana.
You decide not to ask why. And then there's Malacca. Malacca, a port city rising fast on the Malay Peninsula, sticky with heat and opportunity.
You quickly realize it's poised to become one of the most important trading hubs in Southeast Asia.
And thanks to your earlier visits and carefully planted alliances, Malacca sees the Ming not just as distant overlords, but as partners, protectors even. You formalize that bond. Your fleet anchors dramatically offshore, then proceeds with one of your now famous diplomatic processions, embroidered robes, poetic speeches, strange and beautiful gifts.
The local ruler agrees to be officially recognized by the Ming court, and you grant him a seal of legitimacy that turns heads in every nearby kingdom. It's pure political theater, and it works beautifully. You return the favor by bringing Malaccan envoys with you back to China, where they're treated with pomp and circumstance.
When they return home, their ships bear imperial gifts and a message to all their rivals. Malacca is under the wing of the dragon, and yet, for all the ceremony, the heart of your voyage is often found in the quieter details, like the night spent
studying the stars with your navigators, hunched over wooden compasses and grease-marked maps, trying to anticipate monsoons with nothing more than wind and instinct.
Or the hours spent in portside workshops, listening to craftsmen describe how they dye their textiles, smelt their metal, or store their pickled fish. You collect these facts like trinkets.
Not because anyone requires it of you, but because you understand the value of knowledge, of connection,
Of knowing how a place breathes, you've also started to take note of something.
subtler. Everywhere you go, you hear stories.
Stories about you. Some say your ships are guided by sea dragons. Others claim you can speak the language of dolphins. A boy in Sumatra insists you once calmed a typhoon by reciting poetry. You do not correct them. You know that the myth of Zheng He is becoming as powerful as the man.
And in a world where empires rise and fall on perception alone, this myth may be your greatest tool.
Or perhaps your softest pillow, on nights when the sea refuses to let you sleep. But even myths get tired.
And by the end of this 5th voyage, you feel something tugging at you. Not weariness exactly, but the weight of repetition. You've seen
a dozen ports welcome you with fanfare. A dozen rulers bow with carefully worded tributes.
You've handled disputes, rescued hostages, calmed quarrels between local princes and your own deckhands, and you begin to ask yourself, how long can this rhythm last?
The Confucian scholars back in the capital are growing more vocal.
They call the voyage is wasteful, luxurious distractions from domestic concerns.
They point to the mounting costs,
the dwindling need for foreign tribute, the risk of empowering eunuchs, especially eunuchs like you, with influence as vast as your reach. You don't answer them, of course.
That's not your role.
But you feel the shift.
Still, you press on, because your emperor still believes, because your sailors still sing, because the ocean hasn't finished whispering to you yet.
You'd think, by the 6th voyage, everything would be routine.
You've greeted kings and caliphs, mapped coastlines that were once just rumors, and even coaxed a seasick giraffe through customs.
But no, nothing is ever routine on the open sea. This time, things feel
off. It begins with the weather.
The monsoons shift unpredictably, and your crew, now full of seasoned veterans and a few overconfident new recruits, grumbles as the sails flap awkwardly in dead wind. You drift for days near Sumatra, waiting for the skies to decide what kind of voyage they're in the mood for.
A cook declares it's bad luck to sail on a Wednesday. You sail on a Thursday instead, just to be safe. The mission, officially, is to reinforce relations with the Western Indian Ocean kingdoms.
But unofficially, it's a victory lap. You've done the hard work already. Most rulers now expect you.
Some even seem eager to show they remember your previous visits.
One sultan
greets you by offering a poem in your honor, though it rhymes poorly and involves a camel for some reason. You smile anyway. It's the thought that counts, but the journey turns odd when your fleet reaches Bengal. You're given a gift that surpasses even the giraffe. A rhinoceros, a real one.
Thick-skinned, vaguely irritated, and entirely too large to fit comfortably on any of your ships.
Still, your men somehow wrangle it aboard with ropes, a makeshift ramp, and more prayers than anyone wants to admit.
The rhinoceros spends much of the voyage glaring at everyone and attempting to eat the decorative ropes, its intended destination. The Ming court, of course.
Because nothing says prestige like presenting your emperor with a cranky, horned behemoth from a distant land.
Word spreads quickly.
Even the crew starts calling it his stubborn grace.
But the rhino is only one of your worries. As you sail past Ceylon, Sri Lanka, now you find yourself embroiled in yet another local dispute. The island's divided leadership has caused diplomatic confusion, and you're caught between rival
factions both claiming legitimacy. You attempt a peaceful resolution, but when one faction captures some of your men, you're forced to act. You march inland with troops.
You reclaim your people, and in the process, you detain the local ruler
and bring him back to China.
It's not ideal, and certainly not how tribute diplomacy is supposed to work, but you can't ignore an insult, and your orders leave room for interpretation. Historians still argue about this episode. Were you upholding Ming honor or overreaching into regional politics?
Was this a necessary show of strength or a crack in your carefully constructed image as the sea's calm emissary?
No consensus.
Only conjecture, scattered across footnotes and half-erased maps. You press onward to Calicut again, where familiar faces welcome you like an old friend.
The markets are bigger, the harbour more crowded, and the sense of mutual respect now runs deep. You attend feasts under moonlit skies, where spiced lentils and roasted fish are served on banana leaves, and your name is toasted in a dozen different languages. And yet,
something is different. The fleet is still grand.
The tribute is still flowing, but the mood back in China has changed. Word arrives via a breathless courier who spent weeks chasing your fleet that the younger emperor is ill. Gravely so. Your old friend, your patron, the man who elevated you from palace servant to admiral of the known world. You feel the news like a wave hitting amidships. You don't say much to your officers.
You finish the voyage. You carry out your duties. But your heart is heavier, and your mind begins to wander more often to Nanjing's courtyards, to that red-robed boy you once walked beside. Dreaming of the sea, you begin the long journey home.
Carrying silks, spices, gold-threaded letters, and a rhino that has now kicked through its third cargo gate. The return is swift, efficient, and marked with far fewer ceremonies.
You dock at the harbour with less pomp.
The officials who greet you are cordial, but you can sense the undertone of calculation, and soon the worst is confirmed. The younger emperor is dead. His son now rules, and while he doesn't openly oppose you, his ministers, the Confucian scholars, long skeptical of maritime adventures, are gaining ground.
They question the expense of your expeditions, the practicality of long-distance tribute, and your own growing symbolic power. You know what this means. The tide is turning. You keep your head high.
You oversee the unloading of goods. You present the rhinoceros with a theatrical bow, and the new emperor's court politely applauds, though no one quite knows where to keep it. The rhino ends up in a carefully constructed enclosure and spends most of its days sighing loudly and terrifying gardener's daughter as for you. You fade into the shadows again, just slightly. Your status remains high.
Your accomplishments are undeniable, but you can sense that your next voyage may be your last.
The winds at court are shifting, and even the biggest ships can't sail against politics forever. But for now, you remain the Grand Admiral.
Still standing, still listening for the sea, and deep down, a whisper lingers. One more voyage.
One more chance to chase the edge of the map. The sea calls again. You try to resist at first. You've done your duty 7 times over.
You've crossed oceans, dodged typhoons, wrestled with rogue sultans, and personally escorted a giraffe, a zebra, and a rhinoceros across thousands of
nautical miles. What more could possibly be expected?
But history, like the tide, isn't so easily stopped. You find yourself summoned once more. A quieter summons, this time less fanfare, more formality.
The new emperor, the Hongxi emperor, has died after only a short reign.
His son, the Xuan emperor, takes the throne. He's young, intelligent, and curious about the world beyond China's borders.
Not as bold as his grandfather, perhaps, but still willing to send his Grand Admiral on one final mission. So here, you are older now, slower in step, but with that same flicker of purpose behind your eyes. The 8th voyage begins. You know this.
One will be different.
Fewer ships, fewer men, and none of the towering treasure vessels that once made coastal kingdoms tremble and cheer.
Still, the core remains. You, your seasoned officers, and a path westward through the monsoon lanes. This time, your focus narrows.
You are not out to impress or intimidate.
You are here to reassure. The Indian Ocean is shifting. Old alliances are fraying.
Pirates and regional wars threaten the tribute routes. Word from Malacca says a new power is muscling in, trying to block Chinese influence. The emperor wants a presence visible, firm, unmistakable. So you leave port quietly, with less celebration, but the same heavy responsibility. You sail past Hainan's warm shores, past the spice-scented winds of Java, and onward to Malacca. There, you find tension thick as humidity.
2 local leaders, both claiming to rule, have drawn swords and supporters. One has ties to your old networks.
The other is rumored to be courting Arab backers. You choose your side. With a calm display of power, you intervene.
Troops are landed, ships are stationed in the bay, and order is
gently imposed. Your preferred leader is installed, one more loyal to China's trade policies and less inclined to disrupt the delicate balance. Historians still argue whether this was a peacekeeping mission or thinly veiled imperial interference. Was it diplomacy with Chinese characteristics, or a last gasp of maritime empire building?
Again, no clear answer.
Just parchment fragments, sailor songs, and debate from Malacca. You press on to Calicut once more.
You know this coast better than your own childhood shoreline now. The harbour must greet you with an embrace. Spices flow like rain, and the ruler hosts a feast in your honour under strings of lanterns and a canopy of stars. There's something melancholy about this visit, though.
You can feel the shift.
The port is busy, yes, but there are new merchants in town, Portuguese voices, Arabic ships growing in number, even whispers of European maps that stretch farther than they should. Your time is not yet over, but it's nearing dusk. You linger a little longer in Hormuz this time, marveling again at its stone towers and the bustling market smells, rosewater, incense, grilled dates, camel leather. A Persian poet gifts you a riddle written in calligraphy so fine. You squint to read it.
You have no idea what it means.
You keep it anyway. Then on the way home, something happens. A storm late in the season, unexpected.
It hits of the coast of Sumatra. The winds howl. The sky turns greenish black, and the waves pound with the force of mountains in motion. One
of your smaller escort ships is lost.
2 others limp behind, damaged and leaking. You stay on the command ship, shouting orders calmly, as if the wind might listen better if you don't raise your voice. Eventually, it passes, but it leaves its mark. You dock in Nanjing later than expected, the fleet battered but intact. The
officials who meet you don't look thrilled to see you. Their priorities have shifted. Their questions are short. Their hands stay tucked inside their sleeves. Still, you present your final reports.
You offer the tribute. You detail your interventions. The Emperor accepts it all graciously. But you sense the end has come. The Ministry of Rights thanks you for your service. You bow.
You smile.
You feel the familiar weight of salt and silence pressing in, and then nothing. No new orders arrive.
No ships are prepared.
No fleets assembled.
The shipyards grow quiet. The cartographers roll up their maps. You remain a high-ranking
court figure, still respected, still called Zheng He the Admiral, but your voyages are finished. Some say you retire quietly. Others whisper that you die at sea, buried beneath the waves on your final return. There's no consensus, no tomb with certainty, only rumors. Some scholars claim your body lies beneath a small hill in Nanjing, beneath a stone steely engraved with tales of your travels.
Others argue you were buried at sea, with incense and chants and a folded silk rope placed gently in the current. Either way, your story doesn't end in silence. Your voyages linger in the maps of the Indian Ocean,
in the spices traded across empires, in the Persian poems and Tamil carvings, in the Malay legends and African port cities that still whisper of red sails and towering ships, and maybe most of all, in the stories told by sailors, long after their lanterns are out, about a unique admiral who crossed oceans without ever losing sight of the stars. The sea may have stilled, but its echoes continue soft as the creak of rope on wood, persistent as waves lapping against a harbor wall. You're back on land now, tucked into the quiet of court life.
Though you sometimes forget how to walk without the sway of the deck beneath your feet.
You attend ceremonial banquets, not through Confucian lectures, and write reports you suspect no one will ever fully read. You think sometimes of the giraffe. It's a memory that always gets a chuckle from your attendants. That day in Bengal,
when the Sultan presented the animal as tribute, swearing it was a qilin, a mythical creature of Chinese legend, said to appear only in times of great virtue.
You tried to explain that it was just a very long-necked herbivore, but nobody was having it. The court was thrilled. Scholars praised your voyage as a sign of heaven's favor.
Artists painted the giraffe floating on a cloud. You still have one of those scrolls. It's wildly inaccurate that giraffe has antlers and eyebrows, but it makes you smile. Life on land has its rhythms. You supervise shipyard repairs, review port records, and sometimes tutor younger eunuchs in geography and navigation.
They listen politely, though you can tell they think your tales are exaggerated.
Who could believe a harbor with pink sand? Or a king who greeted you with a dance involving 20 trained parrots?
Historians still argue whether your voyages truly shaped Chinese foreign policy, or were merely extravagant displays meant to boost imperial prestige. Some call them the zenith of China's open seas era. Others claim they were flashy distractions
from more pressing land-based concerns. And more recently, some revisionist scholars suggest your expeditions were far less peaceful than the official records let on. But here's the thing, they weren't there. They never watched a storm tear
through a fleet at midnight, or saw a desert sunset reflected on a polished deck. They never walked barefoot through Zanzibar's morning mist, or helped broker peace between feuding island chieftains using only a shared pot of tea and a translator who barely spoke either language. You did all that, and more. There are moments,
though, where it all feels like a dream. You catch yourself tracing sea routes on the court's marble floor with your foot, the way you once traced them in the sand with a stick.
You hum old sailor songs when you think no one's listening. You still wake early, body trained by years of sunrise watches, but the world is changing. The new emperor, Xuand, begins to shift his gaze inward.
The court budget is tightened.
The
Ministry of War lobbies for more fortifications along the northern borders.
And the Grand Secretariat suggests that perhaps, just perhaps, it's time to scale back these costly overseas adventures. You're polite, of course,
Respectful. You nod, you agree, but it hurts in the dry corners of your mind. You start to see.
The rot setting in not in the ships, but in the spirit.
China, once so bold on the ocean, is beginning to close the curtain. Then, in your 60s now, you're given a final task and no sailing this time.
No banners or elephants or musicians, just a simple commission. Oversee the repair of the temples and irrigation systems in your home province.
A reward, they say. A retirement assignment. So you go. You walk among rice paddies, now more familiar.
Then coral reefs.
You inspect granaries, chat with engineers, and sip tea with village elders who remember you as the boy with no family name, sent to the capital with his head bowed. And even though you're far from the sea, you find it in everything.
The way water flows through carved stone gutters, the way the wind tugs at your robe like a sail, the way you still sleep best when the rain falls. Now and then, visitors arrive. Pilgrims, minor nobles, even the occasional foreign merchant who's heard your name in Zanzibar or Sri Lanka or Mecca. They bring small tokens. A coin, a scrap of cloth, a bowl of unfamiliar fruit.
You thank them with a quiet smile and listen to their stories, even when they tell you versions of your own life you don't quite recognize. One evening, as the sky turns a soft indigo, you walk out to the riverbank and spot a child floating.
A toy boat, just a folded lotus leaf with a stick for a mast.
You squat beside him and ask where it's going. He shrugs.
Far, he says. You smile. That's good enough. In your quieter moments. You wonder about the men who sailed with you.
Some stayed in the lands they visited, married into local families, became legends in their own way.
Others returned and faded into civilian life. Farmers and merchants and officials once again.
A few, like you, became stories whispered in tea.
Shops half memory, half myth, and so it is that your final years pass not in fanfare, but in stillness. You don't miss the danger. You miss the horizon, but there's peace in the knowledge that you touched it, that you crossed oceans not for conquest, but for curiosity, for diplomacy, for the chance to understand the world just a little better. You never learn to swim, by the way. In the gentle hush of a late spring morning, you rise with the sun. No alarms, no messengers, no imperial commands, just habit. A sailor's body clock forever tuned to the rhythm of tides and twilight. You stretch slowly. Your joints make small protests, like creaking planks on a windless day.
Outside your modest estate, a cicada begins its patient song.
You can hear farmers preparing their tools.
Somewhere, a dog barks once and then decides it's not worth the trouble. You pour tea. It's
not the rich, perfumed blend of courtly banquets. It's plain green leaf, slightly bitter, steeped just a little too long.
But there's comfort in the bitterness. Your garden is your new sea.
Instead of maps and stars, you navigate rows of bok choy and mustard greens.
Your hands, once accustomed
to ropes and rudders, now coax soil around seedlings.
You found joy in this quiet tending. A different sort of voyage, one that asks for patience, not propulsion. Occasionally word reaches you from the capital.
Rumors, mostly.
That the Ministry of Rights has reassigned your last crew.
That your fleet, or what's left of it, sits moored and forgotten in a dock choked with reeds.
That one of your interpreters has started a school for foreign languages in Hangzhou. You're pleased about that last one. He always was clever, even if he called cinnamon spicy tree dust for
the first 2 years. Historians still debate whether your voyages were driven by imperial virtue or subtle power plays.
Some call you a peaceful envoy. Others hint at veiled threats beneath your gift-giving.
A few French scholars claim the entire project was a prolonged attempt at impressing distant lands into tribute submission naval diplomacy with a generous helping of propaganda. You read none of their essays. Instead, you write letters to old shipmates, though half go unanswered.
A few men have passed.
Others have retreated into their own quiet corners. Still, sometimes a parcel arrives. A carved turtle from Java, or a tin of sweet pickled mango from Malacca. Gifts from those who remember. You place them in a cabinet.
Each one a story you could tell in your sleep. Once in a while, you're invited to give a talk at a local temple school.
The students are polite, if a bit fidgety. They expect maps, drama, maybe pirates. You give them descriptions of sea fog,
so thick it's silent sound. You talk about unloading horses in ankle-deep surf, about monsoon winds that could rip a sail in half, and about how to barter for bananas without knowing the word for banana. You always end with a question. What would you bring on your
own voyage? Some say swords,
others books.
One girl once whispered, my grandmother's soup ladle.
You like that answer best. There are days, though, when it aches this slowness.
You miss the urgency of the quarterdeck, the barked commands, the simple adrenaline of a storm you have no choice but to outlast. You miss the camaraderie too, the gallows humor, the way your crew could make poetry out of seaweed stew and reused socks, and once in a blue moon, you dream of that first voyage again. The deck bucking beneath your feet, the sails catching wind like lungs inhaling for the first time, the shock of sunlight on salt water, the knowledge that you were doing something no one else had done not quite like this, not on this scale, not with this crew. You dream of those rare nights when the ocean went utterly still and the stars looked close enough to pluck from the sky. You remember how, in moments like that, even the rowdiest sailors would fall silent, their eyes turned upward, each of you held briefly in awe. You sometimes wonder whether you should have kept a diary. But you never liked writing about yourself. Besides, the sea was your diary, waves marking days, currents pulling memory. You still keep one thing from the voyages close, a small compass. It doesn't work anymore, at least not reliably. The needle stutters like it's forgotten where north is, but you carry it sometimes anyway, tucked into your sleeve, like a charm or a joke between old friends. One morning, as you water your garden, a courier arrives with an imperial scroll. You sigh before opening it. You're too old for another assignment. Surely, but the message is simple. The Emperor, now well into his reign, has commissioned an official chronicle of your voyages. A scribe will visit to record your account, your version for the archives. They want accuracy, they say. Authenticity. You suspect they also want flattery. Still, you agree when the young scribe arrives. He's eager. Too eager. Ink-stained fingers, barely able to sit still. He has a long list of questions, most about fleet logistics, tax registers, and court protocol. You humor him at first, but then you begin to tell the real stories. You describe the amber markets of Arabia, the pepper sting in your throat as you entered Sumatra's forests, the stately chaos of Jeddah's harbor. You recount the time a stowaway cat became ship mascot and demanded salted fish at every morning bell. You explain the unwritten code of signaling ship to ship with colored banners and brass gongs. You surprise yourself with how much you remember. The scribe writes quickly, nodding along. They'll never believe the giraffe, he murmurs. You grin. They didn't believe it then either. And when he's done, when his scrolls are full and his brush is dry, you thank him. You hope he makes you sound slightly more dignified than you ever actually were. But if not, that's fine too. After all, history is just memory, filtered through ink, and you've lived it. The scribe's visit stirs something in you. Not ambition, no. That flame has long since flickered out, like a lantern at sea after midnight. It's something gentler, a kind of remembering. The slow, tide-like return of moments you didn't realize you tucked away. You spend the next few days quietly, well, quieter than usual, wandering your garden, muttering half-formed phrases as though the air might shape them into stories. The neighbor's goat, unimpressed, continues its campaign to eat your squash vines. Sometimes, when the breeze hits just right, you swear you can smell ship tar and oranges, can hear distant waves licking the hulls. You smile at the thought. Your memory's always been a bit dramatic, but your heart still stirs when you think of the great ships, those vast floating fortresses of timber and cloth. Your treasure ships, 7 or 8 times longer than the fishing boats in your village, so wide you could walk across their decks with a small army and not bump elbows. You remember the feeling of climbing aboard, that faint, uncanny sense that the ground was now beneath you, moving but solid, alive but silent. Historians still argue about the exact size of those vessels. Some claim exaggeration, say no wooden ship that large could survive open seas without splitting. Others cite logs and eyewitness accounts, insisting they did exist and that they were masterpieces of Ming engineering. You, of course, know the truth. You stood on them. You helped design the layout for rations and livestock. You knew which vessel carried the fresh water barrels and which one kept extra sails and canvas needles in case of monsoon trouble. You knew the smell of new pitch and the groan of masts under full wind. But your favorite ship was always the 4th one. Not the largest or the fastest, but the luckiest. In 12 years, she never lost a single crew member to the sea. Sailors swore she hummed gently at night, like a lullaby from the wood itself. One evening, over steamed buns and pickled mustard greens, you think back to the animals. You were, in many ways, running a floating zoo. Horses from the northern grasslands, elephants in white-bellied hulls, peacocks that strutted and shrieked like they owned the place, a few crocodiles which you deeply regretted.
A gibbon that learned to untie knots and once released an entire stack of creeds mid-voyage. You still don't know how it figured out the latch. The giraffe, though, that was the star.
The long-necked ambassador from distant Malindi.
When it
arrived in the imperial court, it caused something between confusion and awe. People bowed to it, unsure of its purpose.
One minister called it a Chilin, an auspicious mythical beast.
You didn't correct him. Sometimes it's kinder to let people believe in magic. Back then, the court was all motion and glitter.
You wore silks so stiff they rustled like leaves.
In a dry wind, you made careful bows and repeated the correct phrases. You pretended to enjoy plum wine even when it burned the back of your throat. But the truth is, you always felt a bit out of place among the ministers. You were more comfortable
barefoot on damp deck wood than in brocade slippers at banquets. You liked the call of seagulls better than court musicians, and you preferred the straightforward complaints of sailors to the veiled compliments of officials. Still, you played your part. You gave your reports.
You delivered exotic gifts and accepted theirs in return. Gold and silver, spices and gems.
Parrots that could say "Long live the Emperor" in at least accents. You didn't care much for the treasures.
You cared for the faces. The way a village elder in Calicut smiled when you asked about his herbs. The shy, clumsy handshake from a boy in Mogadishu who'd never seen someone your height. The markets, alive with voices and roasted sesame, with rough cotton and fine incense. The swirl of human life across coasts you'd only known as ink on a scroll. And you remember the send-offs. Each new voyage was like setting off on a slow exhale. You'd stand at the prow of the flagship, watching
the harbour shrink behind you, knowing it might be years before you saw it again.
The wind tugged at your sleeves.
The sea smelled like possibility and fish guts. The crew always held a little ceremony, mostly nonsense.
Tossing rice into the water, saluting the setting sun. One cook always shouted, "Try not to die this time." And everyone would laugh like it wasn't half serious. You think about those days often now, when the world was bigger, your knees were younger, and the ocean hadn't yet run out of surprises.
You think about how no map ever quite matched what you found. How every return home made your house feel slightly smaller, your bed slightly narrower, your old friends slightly more distant. You wondered occasionally what happened to the maps, the ones with your notes in the margins, little arrows and jokes and corrections. "Do not trust Coconut Man," one said. Another marked a reef simply. "Bad fish." You imagined some dusty official locked them in a cabinet, or burned them. Or maybe one of the newer cartographers found them and laughed, recognizing the hand of someone who'd actually been there. Sometimes you catch your reflection in a basin and hardly recognize the man staring back.
The beard is white, the shoulders stoop,
but the eyes, they still squint slightly, like they're trying to judge distance to the horizon. And even now, after all this time, your dreams return to the sea. They always start the same way. A dockside
murmur, a rope being untied, a gust of wind snapping a sail to life. And then the water rises, and the ship moves forward, and you are sailing not away from something, but toward it. You wake up smiling. The sun warms your shoulders as you sit on a worn stone bench outside your home, an old peach tree casting a shifting web of shadow at your feet. The day has that sleepy, golden quality that invites memories, and you're in no mood to resist. The seventh voyage.
You weren't sure there'd even be a seventh, honestly.
You were getting older.
The world seemed to be spinning a little faster. Or maybe your knees just creaked more loudly when you stood up. Either way, there was talk, quiet, cautious talk that perhaps the Emperor's enthusiasm for these expeditions had dulled.
After all, the Empire had already demonstrated its power
and splendor.
The Ming court had its tribute, its giraffes, its jars of foreign spices and rare woods that no one could name, but everyone admired, and besides, the winds of politics were beginning to shift. You could feel it, even at sea.
There was a new faction at court, more frugal, more Confucian, more interested in rice taxes than rhinoceros diplomacy. Historians still debate whether the seventh voyage was meant to be the last from the start.
Some claim it was a kind of swan song, a ceremonial repetition of former glories. Others believe it was intended to scout new alliances, solidify existing ones, maybe even lay groundwork for a grand 8th or 9th journey. But the official records are maddeningly vague, as if the scribes themselves weren't quite sure what the plan was. Still, you went. How could you not? The sea called, the sails rustled, the hulls creaked like polite old men stretching in the morning.
You walked the decks and everything felt right again.
Even the rats in the cargo hold had a nostalgic charm. until they chewed through a crate of precious sugar and caused an entire kitchen mutiny. That last journey took you farther west than ever before, deep into the Arabian Sea, hugging the coastlines of lands where dates fell heavy from palm trees, and the air smelled like cardamom and sun-warmed limestone. One night, you stood on the deck as the stars rolled slowly overhead, and you swore the sea itself was sighing. Not the usual waves or gusty moans, but something older, ancient. Like the ocean knew this was your final dance together and wanted to savor it. You visited 1HOURS, Jeddah, ate each porter bead in the long necklace of the Indian Ocean trade routes.
You spoke with sultans, scholars, spice merchants, and one terrifyingly clever 12-year-old who tried to sell you a camel by insisting it could sing.
It could not. And then there was Calicut again, always Calicut, a city you knew as well as your own.
There, the markets bustled with silks and sandalwood.
The air was thick with fried fish and the metallic clang of cymbals. And of course, old friends, merchants who greeted you like a brother, dancers who remembered your terrible rhythm from last time and dared you to try again. You did. You regretted it, but it was there, amid all the color and chatter, that you first felt it, a flicker of something slipping away. You had a meeting with their local governor.
A polite affair, full of protocol and prepared gifts. You sat across from each other, sipped tea, exchanged practiced compliments. But his eyes kept drifting past you. You realized he was looking at your successor, young, energetic, quick with his numbers, fluent in multiple tongues.
He bowed lower than you ever had. His robes were more finely embroidered, his posture straighter, and when he smiled, it had that glint of someone still new to the world, still full of unspent ambition. You liked him. You also realized he'd do just fine without you that night. You leaned over the ship's railing and watched the lanterns flicker on the water, and you knew this would be the last time. You didn't cry. Not your style. But you did whisper a quiet farewell to the waves, just in case they were listening. The journey home was long, but smooth. The monsoons were kinder than expected. The crew was seasoned and calm.
You had only one major crisis: a cook who tried to replace chili paste with fermented bean curd in a popular stew and nearly caused a shipwide rebellion.
That was resolved with a hasty apology and 3 extra servings of dried mango. When you arrived in Nanjing, the city felt different, quieter. The crowds were smaller. The musicians didn't play as loudly. The officials welcomed you politely, but with a kind of detachment, as though ticking a box on a form rather than greeting a returning hero. And the emperor, well, the emperor had changed. It wasn't his fault.
The empire was shifting beneath his feet. Resources were needed elsewhere. Border defenses, infrastructure, grain stores.
Grand expeditions across distant seas were beginning to feel like expensive indulgences. So your final report was received with a nod, not applause. You bowed, spoke your rehearsed lines, handed over your journals and logs, and then, with no great ceremony, you were dismissed. It was the right time. You moved quietly to your riverside house.
You declined a few ceremonial titles. You allowed your armor to gather dust in a chest beneath your bed.
And you planted squash, because honestly, it was time someone did. Still, some nights, the past rustles through your dreams like a sail catching sudden wind. You see the treasure ships again, lined up like majestic giants, their flags fluttering, their shadows long and regal across the harbor water. You hear the clang of ropes, the barking of orders, the low, steady creak of ancient wood, remembering how to float. And in those dreams, you are not Zheng He, the retired admiral, the aging diplomat, the historical footnote. You are simply your feet planted on deck, hand on the rail, heart full of wind.
There's a small shrine near your home, tucked beneath the sweep of a camphor tree, and sometimes, in the soft blush of early morning, you walk there with a cup of tea in hand and the sound of birdsong carrying faintly across the river. You're
not a particularly spiritual man. Your life has been built more on tide charts and cargo ledgers than on omens or incense. But something about that little shrine, its roof gently bowed with moss, always brings a sense of calm. You leave offerings.
Now and then a persimmon, a folded prayer, the occasional dried anchovy when you're feeling cheeky. This is your rhythm now.
The 7th voyage had been your last, and though no one said it aloud, it was clear. The grand age of Ming maritime glory was coming to an end. You watch it happen in small, quiet ways. The docks at Longjiang shipyard, once alive with hammering and shouts and the thunder of keels being shaped, now echo with a different stillness.
There's some fishing traffic, a few local merchants running modest junks along the coast, but the massive treasure ships,
Gone.
reclaimed by time and bureaucracy. You hear that the court has ordered some of the great records burned, not out of spite or scandal, but out of pragmatism.
Paper stacks up, shelves overflow, and what need is there to keep detailed logs of expeditions that, frankly, no one plans to repeat? Historians still argue whether this act, quiet and administrative, was
The final nail in the coffin for Chinese maritime dominance.
Some believe it marked a philosophical shift inward, a deliberate turn from exploration to introspection.
Others argue it was merely circumstantial to many competing priorities. Too little money, and no one left with your kind of wild, sea-bound ambition. In any case, the ocean no longer calls to China's leaders the way it once did. But you don't mind.
Not anymore. Your garden keeps you busy.
You've become a minor local expert on good cultivation. Children bring you strange bugs they've found.
You identify what you can, make up the rest, and earn their trust with a well-timed sweet
plum or two. You're not lonely. Old crewmates visit.
You trade jokes and reminisce about the time the Scrobe accidentally recorded 200 ostriches instead of 2 and nearly collapsed the ration system of an entire convoy. And letters arrive too well, not often, but now and then. From
Calicut, from Mecca, from Malacca.
little packages wrapped in care, with spices or beads or folded scraps of poetry.
People remember you. One morning, a scholar from the capital visits.
Young, polite, nervous.
He bows so deeply or briefly, concerned he might tip over into your koi pond. He wants to write about you, not in the way the court scribes did.
Not just lists of dates and cargo manifests.
No, he wants your story, the real story.
The sword-crusted mornings, the strange deals made over hot coals and sweet tea.
The giraffe, of course, always the giraffe. You agree.
Slowly, cautiously. You
make him promise not to make you into a myth. You're not a hero.
Just a eunuch who got good at boats. He laughs at that.
He says he's not interested in heroes.
He likes people. Real ones. So you sit together under the peach tree.
You talk.
You remember. And the more you speak, the more it comes back, not just the facts, but the smells, the laughter, the way the sun hit the ocean just before a storm. At some point, you look at the scholar and ask a simple question. Do you think they'll forget? He tilts his head. Thinks, maybe, he says, but probably not all of it. Not if I write it down well. You nod.
That's fair. The great ships may be rotting beneath river silt, their timbers warped by time, their iron nails long since rusted to nothing.
But stories last longer than wood.
Especially when told with care. Sometimes at dusk, you imagine what the world might look like 100 years from now. Or 200.
Will another nation take to the seas with your kind of scale and swagger? Will some distant sail across an ocean and read your name etched in a forgotten chart?
Or maybe, just maybe, a child in a land you never saw will hear your story and dream of ships. It's enough. You don't need statues or temples. You don't need scrolls embossed with gold or emperors reciting your name during ceremonies.
You just want the world to remember that once a boy from Yunnan dreamed of the sea and made that dream real. Oh, and that time you tricked a Portuguese envoy into thinking fermented tofu was a rare dessert.
You hope someone tells that story too. The moon rises over the river. You sip the last of your tea, lean back on your stool, and smile.
The tide rolls on, as it always does, and though your feet are now planted firmly on land, in your heart you are still sailing. The days pass slowly now, and your world has grown pleasantly small. Your mornings begin with a rhythm you never had time for in your seafaring years.
You wake to the sound of roosters from 2 houses down, the low murmur of women washing vegetables
in a stone basin, and the faint, woody smell of someone burning joss sticks for ancestors long gone.
You no longer have to check for wind speed or tide flow. No one's shouting for a mizzenmast to be hoisted.
And best of all, no shipwrecks to chase from your rice bowl. You stretch your legs, still surprisingly strong, and walk through the garden.
You've coaxed into something resembling a tiny jungle.
Your prize snake goods have started curling around the fence again.
You mutter to them like old shipmates. You always did have a knack for coaxing strange things into growing. Still, you
sometimes catch yourself calculating ballast weight while measuring compass,
or estimating a compass bearing while watching birds cross the sky.
A sailor's habits, it turns out, don't retire so easily. One afternoon, a visitor from the Ministry of Rights comes bearing formal parchment and a very stiff neck.
He's brought a letter from the court. It's a quiet honor, an imperial commendation.
For your years of service. Nicely worded, all things considered. They even spelled your name right, which is rarer than you'd expect. You thank him, bow modestly, and later use the stiff paper to steady a wobbly table leg. The Emperor is a world away now, and your teapot is closer, but the letter sparks something.
You begin sorting through your old things. Tokens from Malacca, prayer beads from Calicut, a carved tortoise from Ceylon, and that ridiculous feathered hat someone in 1HOURS insisted was very in fashion. You wore it exactly once. To wide-eyed horror from your crew, you find a crumbling journal. Not official records, those were long turned in, but personal notes.
Scribbles in the margins, sketches of odd creatures, a recipe for spiced flatbread that made half the crew weep with joy. There's even a note to yourself. Remind one not to feed pickled fish to the Siamese ambassador again. You chuckle. That caused quite the diplomatic tangle. Though, to be fair, the ambassador had asked for something flavorful. Historians still argue whether the true purpose of your voyages was trade, tribute, diplomacy, or a bid for symbolic dominance over the known seas.
But leafing through your notes, it feels simpler than all that.
It was about connection.
About showing up in strange places with an open hand, a curious mind, and occasionally a sack of porcelain and cinnamon bark. You recall a moment in East Africa, possibly Mogadishu, though the geography was always fuzzy.
A local elder had gifted you a small bowl carved from ivory, etched with stars.
You couldn't speak the same language, but he had taken your hand and placed it in yours, nodding slowly, a gesture that said, "I see you.
Welcome. You still have that bowl."
You keep dried goji berries in it now. Sometimes you wonder what the world would look like if the voyages had continued.
If ships twice the size of a European carrack had kept slicing across oceans, not for conquest, but for curiosity. If, instead of fortresses and cannons, there had been dinners and stories and giraffes presented with a flourish, would the maps look different now? Would a schoolchild in Lisbon be able to recite the names of Ming harbors the way you once learned?
The stars?
Perhaps.
Or perhaps not. Empires rise, shrink, unfold in on themselves like sails at dusk. But small things endure. Friendships.
Folklore. The smell of clove bread in a Calicut market. A giraffe in a painted mural.
A name whispered. On a breeze. One evening, you hear that a ship has docked nearby, foreign, small and salt one.
The crew speaks a language you don't recognize.
Maybe Turkish. Maybe Portuguese.
You walk to the harbor out of habit more than need. You don't introduce yourself. No one there would remember.
But you watch them work the lines, lower crates,
argue over who misplaced the dried squid, and you smile. You've seen this dance before. Before you leave, you tuck a carved stone token into a coil of their rope, a little jade turtle. No note, no explanation, just a hello from someone who once crossed the same waters. Back in your garden, you settle into your usual stool.
A neighbor waves.
A bird sings. A child yells something about a goat.
And the wind, always the wind, teases at the edge of your robe. Like it remembers the sea you once commanded, you close your eyes and listen. You no longer travel, but the world still arrives at your doorstep quietly, gently, like a story returning home. Word has spread, as it always does, carried by traders, monks, and gossiping barbers. Now and then, a curious pilgrim appears at
your gate, asking if it's true if you really once saw the Red Sea boil under your hull, or if the giraffe tale was just some market stall nonsense. You smile, offer tea, and let them guess for themselves. One young man, a wiry student with ink-stained sleeves and calligraphy dreams, returns often. He asked thoughtful questions. What the stars look like from Java, how Sri Lankan cinnamon compares to the Fujian kind, what it felt like to stand at the edge of Africa and not fall of the world. You humor him with long answers.
He listens like he's absorbing more than words, like he's preparing to carry some of it forward.
Maybe he will.
Maybe one day, someone else will speak your name and picture a ship the size of a palace sliding through fog with silent grace. But
you never make it about yourself.
You speak of your men.
Your carpenters who could build a hull faster than most people could blink. Your translators who knew 7 tongues but still made jokes with their eyebrows. Your cooks who could conjure a feast from salt, rice, and stubborn hope. Historians still debate how many ships you truly commanded. Some say 200. Others insist 300 or more. They argue over the exact cargo manifests, the tonnage, the value in bolts of silk and bars of silver.
But no record captures the sheer spirit of it, the smell of lacquered wood in the morning, the sigh of sailcloth catching wind, or the wide-eyed wonder when land appeared after a month of only stars and water, sometimes in the quiet hours between dusk and night. You take out the compass you once carried.
It no longer points to anything important.
The magnetic pin wobbles with the whimsy of age, but it still feels good in your hand, smooth, solid, familiar. You catch yourself telling it things.
Silly, perhaps, but old habits linger. You tell it about the plum trees finally blooming in the courtyard,
About the strange fruit a neighbor brought back from Hainan.
about the festival last week, when children danced with paper dragons that reminded you of a particularly unruly crew member nicknamed Redfish. There's a deep contentment in stillness. You've learned. You used to think movement to find purpose, that
Momentum itself meant progress. But now you see the beauty in pausing.
in letting memories rise like mist of a warm sea. One night, you dream vividly. You're aboard the Bay Ocean again. Your flagship, your pride. Everything smells of cedar and sea brine.
Your old boots squeak just as they used to.
A storm brews on the horizon, but no one's afraid.
You move from deck to deck, checking riggings, joking with sailors, pointing out stars. Someone shouts land. Ahead.
You lean forward, but instead of a port, it's your village garden, only much larger and wilder. Your snake goats climb the rigging. Your neighbor's goat is inexplicably the helmsman.
The giraffe from Bengal waves a fan with imperial elegance. You wake with a snort of laughter. The next morning, you tell the story to the student.
He's confused, unsure whether to laugh or bow.
You wave him off and offer more tea. You like confusing people a little.
Keeps them on their toes these days. Your name comes up more often in distant places. You're told that in the Malabar coast,
some still recite stories of a great bearded admiral who brought gifts and respected local gods.
In Mecca, a merchant claims his great-grandfather met you near the harbor and mistook your flagship for a floating city. None of it is completely accurate, of course.
Memory is a slippery thing, but you're touched by it anyway.
What's history, if not a series of polite exaggerations shared by firelight?
At times, you feel a mild itch, a flicker of restlessness, like a phantom limb of your former voyages. But then the wind rustles your bamboo screens, and you remember that you are still part of the world's great journey.
Just from a quieter harbor, a little girl from the village likes to visit now. She's 5, has more questions than the emperor has eunuchs, and insists on calling you ship grandpa. You pretend to grumble, but you secretly love it. She
draws you boats wild, improbable things with wings and too many cannons.
You hang them in the hallway like prize scrolls. You tell her stories about golden elephants in India, about a monkey that tried to steal your compass, about a parrot who spoke better Mandarin than one of your translators. She giggles, asks again if the giraffe could really bow. You nod solemnly.
Only on Tuesdays. She doesn't know what a legacy is, but she's helping you build one, just the same. And so, your days unfold like a well-loved scroll, frayed at the edges, soft
in the middle, and full of quiet detail.
No fanfare.
No trumpet blast, just small joys and gentle echoes the sea still whispers from far away. Some mornings, before the mist fully lifts, you feel like the sea never really let go of you. You rise slowly, not because your body aches though it does, but because it feels proper.
Deliberate.
Like the final page of a long chapter that deserves to be turned with care.
You stretch, breathe, and trace the grain of the wood floor beneath your toes, remembering when your world was made of planks, sails, and the endless swaying rhythm of the ocean. There's a plum tree in your courtyard that never bore fruit when you first planted it.
Just leaves.
Quiet, unambitious leaves.
But lately, perhaps inspired by your newfound stillness, it's begun to flower.
Tiny white blossoms appear each spring now, their scent so faint it's like a whisper in another room. The student, the one with ink on his sleeves, now brings his own students.
He calls you Master Zheng out of politeness, though you've told him dozens of times to stop. You offer them tea and snacks. Sometimes you lecture without meaning to. You talk about ballast stones and monsoon winds, about the shape of a good rudder and the sound a hull makes when it's properly sealed. One day, he reads you something he's written.
A scroll, simple and sincere, full of your voyages, your
ships, your sailors. He calls it a tribute. You correct a few minor details, but your voice wavers. It's good. It's too good. And then he bows. A deep, formal bow. You hadn't seen one of those in years. You laugh it off. Tell him he missed a spot on his robe. But inside, you're glad. Not for the flattery, but because he's carrying something forward. A story, a path, maybe even a direction historians
still puzzle over the end of your life. Some say you died at sea, buried beneath waves on your final voyage in 1433. Others argue you returned home and faded quietly from view, leaving only rumors and records to mark your passing.
Some scrolls were rewritten, some names omitted.
Politics, as always, caught in the way. But here, in this slow twilight of your days, you know the truth. You did return. Your feet once again touched Chinese soil. You saw the garden grow, the blossoms return. You taught, shared, remembered. You lived. And as you sit beneath the plum tree one last time, the blossoms falling like soft ash onto your lap, the world grows wonderfully still. Your old sea chest rests beside you.
Inside, your journal, some worn maps, and a few small trinkets from the ends of the earth. Not riches, not relics, just memory anchors. You open the journal one final time, its pages creased and fragrant with old ink.
Your script has faded, but it's there your record of moonlit ports, of lemongrass markets, of laughter beneath foreign constellations. You add one last note.
The characters come slowly, but your hand is steady, and then you close it. There are smells of spring.
Somewhere in the distance, a child calls out.
The world is still spinning, ships still sailing, stories still being told. You've done your part. The journey was long and strange and full, and now it's time to rest. You sit back now, the long tail gently behind you, like a ripple fading on a calm harbor. No more sails to raise, no more orders to give.
The ocean has quieted.
The crew has disembarked. The world continues on, slowly and softly, as it always has, with or without ships the size of palaces gliding through the mist. Your breath slows. Your eyes grow heavier. The rhythm of the waves lingers in your chest, even now.
It's a rhythm you once lived by, and maybe still do in memory, in dream, in sleep. There is peace in knowing that some journeys don't need destinations.
Some stories simply exist to be carried, shared, and whispered across time. And maybe tonight, as you drift off, part of you finds your way back to the deck, not as an admiral, not as a symbol of empire, but simply as a sailor with wind in your hair and stars overhead. No noise, no rush, only the soft creak of wood, the hush of silk against your sleeve, and the eternal hush-hush of the sea's lullaby. You
are safe.
You are still, and everything, just for now, is exactly where it needs to be. Good night.